There's a wonderful little philosophical story. It's almost a parable, told, if memory serves me correctly, by the British philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell. It goes something like this. Two men are standing in front of Macy's in New York City, watching people enter and exit the store. We'll call them Tom and Harry. Suddenly, an Eskimo bursts out the door of Macy's and runs down the street. Tom asks out loud, "Why is that Eskimo in New York City?" Harry answers, "That Eskimo is a famous criminal from Alaska, and he is in New York City because he's on the lam from Alaskan authorities." Then a second Eskimo bursts out the door of Macy's in apparent pursuit of the first Eskimo. Tom then asks, "Why is that Eskimo here in New York City?" Harry answers, "That Eskimo is a detective from Alaska sent here to capture the criminal Eskimo." Then, suddenly, a third Eskimo bursts out the door of Macy's in apparent pursuit of the second Eskimo. Tom then asks, "Why is that Eskimo here in New York City?" Harry answers, "That Eskimo is the brother of the criminal Eskimo, and he is trying to foil the detective Eskimo's attempt to capture his brother." But then Tom asks, "But why are all the Eskimos here in New York City? Why is the totality of these three Eskimos here in New York City?" To which Harry responds, "After I have given you the answers to the reasons why each of the Eskimos are here in New York City, I've given you, in effect, the reasons why they are all here. It then doesn't make sense to ask why the totality of the Eskimos are here in New York City." Russell's point is that once you've given an explanation for each aspect of a phenomenon, including the relationships of those aspects, it's nonsensical to then require an explanation of the phenomenon as such. In his video, "Why I Am Not an Atheist," Professor Anton seems to suggest that, some phenomena as such require explanations above and beyond the explanations of their various aspects. These phenomena map, more or less, to what he calls the sacred and eternal. In fact, Professor Anton believes that it is a deficiency of some atheists that they don't recognize the significance and validity of some of these questions. Questions like, why is there something instead of nothing? A question, if I might interject, that couldn't be asked at all if somethingness wasn't a given. And questions like, where did all of this stuff come from, and why are we here? My sense is that Professor Anton would think that this question would still have validity even if each aspect of the universe in their relationships and us could be accounted for. And while I think that each aspect of the universe and its relationships could never be accounted for given its magnitude and flux, I cannot think why it doesn't suffice to be content with explaining what aspects and relationships of aspects we can, confident that what we cannot currently explain could, in principle, be explainable. I don't know why we need to leap to the idea that the universe and us require an additional transcendental explanation. It seems that in Professor Anton's case, that these additional explanations are required to account for what he calls our experience of the quality of life. His idea about the quality of life is tied to another idea of his, the idea that life is purposeful. In fact, he uses that phrase, and I'm quoting, "Life is purposeful." He says, and I quote, "The purpose of life is more than just the continuation of life. It's the continuation of life infused with quality. End of quote. What does he mean by quality? He says, and I quote, "It's the qualities people bring to their lives." End of quote. He evokes, it apparently invokes questions for him like, quote, "How artistic are people able to make their lives? How beautiful are people able to make their art, music, and interactions?" End of quote. Now all of that is well and good, and I agree that the quality that people confer on their lives has a great deal to do with making their lives meaningful. But I guess I don't get how any of these considerations requires us to invoke discourses about God, divine logos, ultimate purpose, and the sacred. Why is the language of mysticism required to discuss people conferring quality and meaning on their lives? In other words, why is the language of God in the sacred uniquely required to describe the experience of the quality of life? If the language of God in the sacred that Professor Anton uses to describe the quality of life can, without a significant loss of meaning, be translated into language that does not employ theological or sacred terms, then why should we use theological or sacred terms to describe the experience of the quality of life? Consider Professor Anton's statement that he makes in his video. His statement is, "Life is sacred." Let's retranslate that statement into the statement, "Life is ultimately worthwhile," in a way that ultimately means something akin to highest value. Now, isn't that just a way of saying that the highest value we hold is that life is worthwhile? Now, what is lost between saying that the highest value we hold is that life is worthwhile and life is sacred? Nothing of any significance that I can tell, because the person who holds that life is sacred, ipso facto, holds as the highest value that life is worthwhile. Perhaps Professor Anton can elaborate on these matters further, because I'm, at least, with Harry on this matter. I'm inclined to think that once you've answered why each of the Eskimos are in New York City, you don't need to ask about the totality of them being in New York City. Thanks for your attention.